panel today is about jail reduction and public safety. So jail reduction, that sounds easy, right? Oh, no, okay. It's not, so that's good. Because jail reduction is really about changing systems. I haven't heard us talk about that in the last couple of days. I have heard about culture change. But what we're really doing is changing a system, which takes a lot. Takes a lot of dedication on your part. And then when I started looking at this about 10 years ago, I discovered a framework that I use that I think is very successful that I want to share with you this morning. And so the framework is values, challenge, solution, and action. And it's a framework that people have started using. I specifically use it in the Department of Justice Right to Counsel National Campaign. We've also seen it in our Smart Pretrial project that I oversee. I'll give you an example. For Smart Pretrial, we started with values. And those values were safety, fairness, and effectiveness. And what you do for social change or system change is you need everybody at the table. Denise mentioned this in her opening comments. A key, and I'm going to go through some elements that I've outlined for successful system change in a minute. But collaboration is key, and bringing all the people to the table, like we do with the Community Court project, and getting them to agree on values and benchmarks. Because what we're doing in all these initiatives is we are changing systems. And to have everyone together just sets you up for success. Some of the elements that I've highlighted are collaboration, as I talked about, and just a few initiatives that do that are the Community Court Grant Project, Smart Pretrial Project. We have 3 sites. It's the City and County of Denver, Yakima County, which I think people from Yakima are here, correct? Yakima? I thought someone mentioned Yakima was here. And then the state of Delaware. The Right to Counsel National Campaign was about engaging communities on the crisis in public defense delivery systems. And while I have the podium, I'm just going to make a plug for you all to really think about your defense as part of your system. Former Attorney General Holder always used to say it's a 3-legged stool. You have the prosecution, the court, and the judge, and the defense. And we cannot have a fair system without a defense system that has the skills, time, and resources to present defense for everybody, especially those who can't afford it. And then the MacArthur event initiative that you're going to hear more about also uses the collaborative approach. Also, it's about changing your reward system. And Laurie actually reminded me of this when we had our call to discuss the panel. For successful system change, you have to change how you reward people. You have to look at differently, and I've always said it matters what we count. So if you count convictions, that's what matters. If you count how many community meetings you go to, then that's what matters. And then you change how you reward everyone. I came from the local level. Many of you know and can probably tell I'm not from Massachusetts. I got my career as an assistant prosecutor in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so when I came up to DC, what I always said in meetings is that criminal justice happens at the local level. A little asterisk unless you're a unified state like Connecticut. And then it happens more at the state level, that's like a county. But we really recognize that it happens at the local level and at the county level. And so when you're doing these change initiatives, you really have to work with all your county or local or unified court system players. Getting buy-in from the front line and the community, which is another reason that I think we've been so successful with community justice. Getting community and police on the same page. And that's something that Mike's going to talk about, a success that he's had in Connecticut doing that. And then lastly, creating a safe space to look at your data through a racial and ethnic lens. It's something that we're focusing on at the Department of Justice. We found very, very important. For the first time, Tshaka Barrows here with us in a Smart Pretrial. All of our 3 sites are doing that. And the way to successfully really do that is to create a safe space for you as a jurisdiction to talk about that, and to look at what's happening, not pointing our fingers at anybody. We heard, I think it was Amy yesterday on the panel, talk about, you don't want the police to think they're being racist, or that's when they get their backs up. And that's not the way to change systems or to have everyone come together for real sustainable change. So community justice and jail reduction. How do those go together? Why are we at a panel about jail reduction? Well, two things that I've heard here over the last couple of days. So many of you were in Mike Rimpel's research session, and he talked about some of the research out of Red Hook, talks about community court reduces incarceration days. So there's some jail reduction that's directly attributable to community court. And then in Greg's opening, he talked about the 4 principles or ideas he had about community justice. And 2, 3, and 4 were community engagement, public safety, and procedural justice. But his first element, and I'm going to quote what he said, ties directly to our session today. So what we want to do at community justice is make real a system that doesn't default to incarceration. And that's what we're doing now. And I think there's a moment in time right now that we are thinking differently about how we use jail. What's the purpose of jail? At the Department of Justice, we're really asking you all to think seriously about who you put in jail. Who do you, for us, it's about public safety. How many of you know your jail population? You know who's in jail in your communities? So a few of you. That's a first step. See who's in jail. Talk with your police on, why are we taking them to jail? I really urge you to think differently about how you use jail. Laurie's going to talk to us about the MacArthur initiative that's about the misuse and overuse of jail. This is a moment in time when you have the left and the right coming together, and you have the support of the Department of Justice to think differently about how you use jail, and then reduce jail use. So this leads me to our first speaker. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to do more of a town hall to talk to us about the MacArthur initiative and to remind us about the problem and why MacArthur got into this. Laurie?
Thanks, Kim, and thanks to CCI, which is actually one of the partners for the Safety and Justice Challenge. And I'm also delighted to share the podium today for the staff dais or the stage with the state of Connecticut. It's also been involved in the Safety and Justice Challenge, and Tshaka, who's along with Burns, is also involved in our work. So, as many of you may know, the MacArthur Foundation has been involved in justice issues for practically all of its existence. We initially got into the field and with regard to how the justice system responded to people who had serious mental illness. And we had a research network called Mental Health and the Law that conducted some of the primary research on what it meant to be competent to stand trial, what happened when someone was coerced into participating in treatment or was involved in the system, as well as what is the risk of dangerousness or violence among people with mental illness. We built on that work and extended it out as we became concerned about the involvement of juveniles in the justice system and how the system lost its way in the 90s, calling young people in conflict with the law super predators, and the result of that being more youth transferred to the adult criminal court, more youth remaining in the juvenile court but being incarcerated. So as that work began to wind down and the foundation looked to build on the legacy of its work of approaching these problems, both from the perspective of research and policy, but also being very grounded in working in jurisdictions to make changes, we started to look at the landscape of criminal justice reform and recognize that we were at an unusual historical moment where there was concern about the growth in incarceration in the United States, where the population incarcerated in our jails had grown sevenfold over a 40-year period of time, and where the U.S. now is the greatest incarcerator around the world. But an overlooked dimension of this problem, as we began to look at the possibilities for where MacArthur could make a contribution, was looking at what happened at the local level, where people experienced the justice system. And I was really struck by how many of you were not as familiar as I would have thought about your jail population. But in fact, that view is shared by many people in the justice system, and certainly by most people in the United States. And that there are 12 million jail admissions annually. There are disproportionately low-income people and people of color. It has an impact more on certain neighborhoods of color than on others. And that the vast majority of people who are held in the jail, 60%, are being held pre-trial. So they are presumed to be innocent unless they are proven to be guilty. Moreover, many of them are there for non-serious, non-violent crimes, 75%. And the time in jail between the initial arrest and going to trial, that time is increased by about 60% over time. And so significant resources are being spent on jails at the county level, approximately a third of all of the costs with respect to courts and incarceration, when counties could be spending more money on community courts, or as the case might be, in education and health and other public infrastructures, activities that could improve the quality of life in your communities. So as we began to look at the problem, it became clear the system that we call a system and what drives people into the system is indeed not a system. There are decision points made at each point along the way, from initial arrest through bringing a person to jail, to the decision of the prosecutor to charge, to when the public defender is appointed, how long it takes to go to trial, as well as in what happens in court, and then post-disposition. And so we knew that if we were going to change the way America thinks about and uses jails, the approach would have to be comprehensive and coherent, and alignment of all of the key stakeholders and actors in the system. And they would have to be willing to look at their data, map their system, identify what the drivers of their population are, and moreover, the foundation was going to ask them to look at racial and ethnic disparities, because this is just as much a matter of racial and social justice as it is criminal justice. And you would have to get buy-in and participation from all of the systems, not just the criminal justice system, because in many cases what the justice system is dealing with, as you are well aware, in community justice and in community courts, is the service systems failing people earlier on. So what we initially did was issue an RFP. Now, because we thought of this as a problem hidden in plain sight, we weren't certain how many applications to participate in the Safety and Justice Challenge we would receive. So we released the RFP last year and had a pool about how many jurisdictions would apply. And within estimates range between 30 and 100 applications. We thought the people saying 100 were very optimistic. But in fact, we got nearly 200 applications. We selected 20 jurisdictions from that initial pool, and we gave them grants of about $150,000 to go through a very strategic and structured planning process, where they had to look at their data, they had to show that all the system players were at the table, and identify the drivers of their jail population. We gave them ambitious targets about what they would need to do to reduce their jail population over the next 3 years that range from 15% to 30% of their average daily population. And they came back to us with their proposals in February. And what we did then, in a very structured review process with our colleagues, is we identified 11 of those jurisdictions to receive grants between 1.5 million and 3.5 million over a period of 2 years to drive down their jail populations. And for the jurisdictions that, through the competitive application process, fell somewhat short but are on the path to reform, we've made grants to continue to engage them in the work needed to reduce the use of jails. And when we say the use of jails, we mean safely reduce the unnecessary incarceration. And so jurisdictions are looking at populations that don't belong in jail, such as people with mental illness. They're looking at making changes in pretrial justice and services. They're looking at alternatives for law enforcement instead of bringing people to jail. They're looking at ways for prosecutors to speed up the court processing. And what we've discovered is that while there are many cross-cutting themes, these are local problems that need local solutions, but it's a national problem that needs to be brought to everyone's attention. So we have a robust set of communications and policy activities in addition to the work in the sites. And plus the awards for their support, we're also providing them with training and technical assistance from groups like the Burns Institute, the Center for Court and Innovation, Justice Management Institute, Justice System Partners, and the Vera Institute for Justice. We're also asking them to track their data. We're coming up with performance metrics at the local level in terms of where those changes they propose, what impact they'll actually have on their jail population. And in addition to that, we have a core set of indicators. And RTI International will be evaluating the initiative over time. So we're in this for the long haul, where these initial grants for 2 years, we expect this to, the jurisdictions to come back to us for additional funding for at least up to 5 years. And the work itself, we hope to add additional cohorts of jurisdictions to participate with us along the way.
Before we move on, Laurie, can you share with us some of the challenges that you saw as the sites competed and worked to implement?
So often what happened is you get the buy-in of some of the stakeholders, but not all of the stakeholders. And that was important to us to see that we got the alignment of all of the key agencies and systems. Not just the managers, but the political leadership. As we talked about before, it's not like the DAs, the city, or the law enforcement or the county board of supervisors have the same incentives. So they needed to all be at the table. It also meant collaboration with other systems. So how do you get the mental health and substance use agencies involved when they're often quite happy to see their clients where their service system failures end up in the justice system. But I'd say the biggest challenge, which was surprising to us because we've been working in juvenile justice for so long, was the ability to code race and ethnicity of the population as it moves through the jails. Everyone wanted to talk about reducing the harm, having fewer people come to the jail and be processed through the courts, how long they stay, but they were reluctant to break that down and didn't know how to have those conversations because they are difficult ones, which is when we enlisted the Barnes Institute to help us not only work with our jurisdictions, but more importantly, in many respects, work with our TA providers to figure out how to have those tough conversations and how to look at the data.
Another challenge that Laurie and I have both seen in our sites is just collecting the data and how hard it is to get data. In Smart Pretrial, we require all 3 sites to give us certain data. And because the court collects it differently than the jail, than the prosecutor, and then sometimes your defender doesn't have any data. But I have to say, I was surprised just how difficult it was to get data and the reluctance of the partners to share data. So something for you all to be aware of. Have those conversations on the front end and enter into agreements about sharing data.
And we actually, it was a requirement of the application to include, besides mapping the system and what's your logic model for your changes and who's going to own the charter to make those changes and so on. We asked the jurisdictions to sign a letter of intent for a data use agreement, and that we will need case level data to track the progress of these jurisdictions over time. And that's going to be a major hurdle, as we know. They each have to complete data templates, which we know were very challenging for them because they had to pull the data from a number of different sources. And now we're asking them to take the next step, which is, can we follow a case from the point of arrest through a court disposition, if that's the case?
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Laurie. So, Mike, now we'll turn to you. First off, congratulations on being selected as a site. Yes, very nice. I know that your governor feels like you have too many people incarcerated in Connecticut, and you all have worked very diligently over the last few years to address this. So can you share his thoughts on it and some of the things that you've done?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and good morning, everybody. And I kind of feel like this is Connecticut's entire support network here, because the Department of Justice has been such a great help, actually spanning back over 3 different administrations. The rate at which we're receiving help from you guys is picking up, and we appreciate that. And the MacArthur Foundation has come in. As you know, we were fortunate enough to be selected for one of their Safety and Justice Challenge grants, and we're excited to now implement that. And CCI actually was the technical assistance provider that herded all the, I don't know, is Erica here? I don't know, she was there, she is in the back. Thank you, Erica. Because getting a group together, across jurisdictional lines and getting to focus on data and focus on planning is not an easy thing to do, and I'm sure you all have that experience in each of your jurisdictions. It's really complicated, but all's well that ends well, and we're very excited about the grant. We're convinced that we'll achieve our goal, which is to reduce the jail population in our state by 18% over 3 years, and we're confident we're going to get there. So let me first start by saying that in a way I'm pinch hitting for my boss, Governor Malloy. He was originally invited to be here, and you can imagine he's got a crazy schedule, and so I'm fortunate enough to be standing in for him, and it's a great honor to do so. Connecticut is unique in a lot of different ways. One way in particular I should emphasize so that you all understand, in our state, you heard Kim refer to the fact we're a unified system. In other words, we have no county government at all. We have no county jails. All inmates, sentenced and unsentenced, are in the State Department of Correction. So it's a state challenge to work with all these jail issues, and it actually works quite well for us. It makes it very easy to make changes. Another thing's a little bit unique. We have no elected prosecutors, we have no elected judges, we have no local courts at all. Everything is on the state level. Our prosecutors are in effect civil servants, and it changes the type of discussion. So in any event, it's different, and we're very happy about the outcomes we've been able to achieve. Maybe some of it is due to the fact that we're not just a small state geographically, but we're also a very unified state across the board. One thing that's also made this very easy to accelerate going forward is the fact, and this has already been mentioned a couple of times, that nationally the discussion about criminal justice issues and criminal justice reform has transformed itself. It's almost on a 180. I was in the legislature for a long time in our state. I can remember the early 90s, just having a discussion about crime and criminal justice was radioactive. Who's soft on crime, who's not. But it's not like that anymore. In Congress, in most of the states, Democrats, Republicans are working together to achieve these goals. It might be the only issue that people actually agree on. So I say this because this is a unique opportunity for all of us, for everyone in this room, to take advantage of this moment in time. So this collaboration issue, which has already been highlighted, was the centerpiece of the MacArthur Challenge to us, right? Could we get people together, focus on a specific problem, and that's our jail population. So for us, that would be everyone who's not sentenced or who has been sentenced to less than a year. Can we bring in prosecutors and public defenders and mental health providers and local police and Department of Correction and come up with a plan that would achieve the results that have been set for us? So in our case, as I said, the goal is reducing our jail population by 18%. A lot of that was driven by data. Most of it was driven by data, actually. And I think I need to sort of acknowledge something that I think everyone in this room knows, that the gathering of data and the idea that data is going to be presented in some type of public forum is very intimidating for everyone who works in the criminal justice system, right? For police, for prosecutors, for corrections, for parole boards, for probation. People get really, and politicians, people get really nervous when they think outcomes are going to be put out there for fear that it will only be a reason to criticize folks or say you're not getting good outcomes. But my experience has been is that when you do this, A, you open a lot of eyes about what's really happening, and B, you actually see that there are quite a few good outcomes. And the ability to present data in a public, transparent way allows people to see what's not working but more importantly, what is working. So what we've been trying to do in our state is identify things that make things worse and stop doing those, and identify things that make things better and pull down on those. And just one quick example of things that make things worse is that what is clear now is that if you take relatively young people and you lock them up even for a week or two, pre-trial, you're almost tripling or quadrupling the chances that that person is not going to succeed going forward. This is what people refer to sometimes as the school to prison pipeline. You can say the same thing about school suspensions and expulsions. So all these things are related to one another, and so that's what we've tried to do. Most of the focus in criminal justice reform over the past 20 years has been really on the back end, parole eligibility, even sentencing, changing mandatory minimums, things like that. And that's important. But what MacArthur highlighted for us is that so much of the real work that needs to be done is on the very front end of the system. Who gets arrested? What happens with these cases? Whether or not they're locked up even for a short period of time. If you can change that outcome, you should be able to anticipate very good outcomes in the future. And so for my boss, Governor Malloy, he made it very clear to us on day one when he started 6 years ago as governor. He said, here's our criminal justice goals. Number 1, reduce crime. Number 2, reduce spending. Number 3, restore confidence in the criminal justice system. Confidence among victims of crime who oftentimes go away feeling they did not get justice. Confidence among African Americans and Latinos who oftentimes feel the system is not fair to them. And confidence among citizens as a whole who almost every day read something in the paper about police misconduct or prosecutorial corruption or parole, probation, correction officers engaged in doing bad things, even legislators, sometimes in our state in particular, governors, well, we're in Illinois, governors getting let out of their offices in handcuffs, right? So all of that undermines confidence in the criminal justice system, which makes it so difficult for us to accomplish the goals that we have. So this opportunity to focus on the front end is very welcome. So briefly, let me say what we're up to right now. The MacArthur Challenge, the Safety and Justice Challenge, has allowed us to focus on our state's 3 small urban areas, relatively small, Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven, but that's where 50% of the arrests in our state take place. These are 3 cities of population of about 130,000 each, so to give you an idea. But geographically, they're very, very small. They'd be neighborhoods in Chicago, right? And so that's where the numbers are. That's where we're going to focus. We're going to focus in one case on the whole front end of whether or not people even get arrested in the first place for certain types of mental illness related offenses or substance abuse, maybe direct referrals to services rather than taking somebody into the police station. And in another city, we're going to focus on hooking people up with a substance abuse issue with direct treatment very rapidly. So that's a very brief synopsis of what we're hoping to do. But very important, the third spoke here is the fact that we're going to try and do collaborative training in these 3 jurisdictions. Because as was pointed out earlier, and by the show of hands in this room, many people aren't really familiar with who's in their jail and for what. And I would say that goes for almost everybody that works in the system, the police, the prosecutors, the judges, the court staff. Don't really know what happens in the jail, what it's good for, what it's not good for, and just getting people to understand who does what. So prosecutors understand what probation officers do, and judges understand what the police do. Just getting people in the same room to talk about these issues we think is going to pay big dividends. This year we're talking about 2 aspects of this issue. One is bail reform. My boss, Governor Malloy, is committed to doing comprehensive bail reform because we know that some of the people who should be locked up pre-trial aren't because they're kind of frequent flyers that get good relations with the bail bondsman. And a lot of people who are just too poor to post even a small bail are sitting in jail for months at a time until their cases get worked out. So that's one big priority. The other one, and I think arguably the most important, is treating young adults differently. In a couple hours, Vinnie Schiraldi and Carol Mason are going to be here to talk about this. Our governor has proposed raising the age of juvenile court jurisdiction up to 21 and having a different system for dealing with offenders under 25, like separate correctional facilities, separate probation, separate parole, specially trained folks dealing with younger adults. And we're very optimistic our legislation is going to pass. I mean, our legislature finishes its work in about a month, because we finally got people to acknowledge that the outcomes we want to achieve have a lot to do with targeting, with prioritization, with focusing on risk and needs. And so we'll see. We'll be the first state to do this if we can accomplish it. I know many states, including Illinois, have begun this discussion. And the last thing I want to say, some of this goes back to a visit that Laurie and Governor Malloy, our Corrections Commissioner Scott Semple, and I actually was able to tag along on for one day. You may have seen this on 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago, visiting the German prisons. When people think of German prisons, they get a mental image, but it's the complete and total opposite, right? The way they deal with offenders, serious and not so serious, is so completely different than our approach. There's so much we can learn from what other people do and how they approach it. And those lessons, I think, are indelible for Governor Malloy. I'm sure I speak for Laurie and the rest. That finding out what works and what doesn't work is the key to this challenge. So thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Yeah, some cutting edge stuff coming out of Connecticut. And I heard all of you, when they were talking about changing, yes, the age, but something to think about and maybe take back to your jurisdiction. So Mike, one of my tenets of success was when you get the community and the police on the same page. And we were talking about a good example that you see in Connecticut, New Haven. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's where I live. I live in New Haven. And we're very proud of our city. We have a mayor, we have a police chief, we have a bunch of community leaders, we have the prosecutors, the judges, the federal prosecutor's office. Everyone was sort of an alignment of the stars in that community to acknowledge one important thing, and that is that the fundamental legitimacy of the criminal justice system is critical to the success. And I think we see this in so many communities around the country where the police are viewed sort of as an army of occupation in an urban area, right? The community doesn't trust the police don't trust the community. And when you get to that kind of a breakdown, only bad things are going to happen, and we certainly have seen that in a number of places. So the police chief in our city, Dean Esserman, has been really focused on solving this problem for the 4 years he's been in the job. And what we see is real progress. I mean, New Haven is leading the state in terms of reducing its crime. You know, one thing I should say, by the way, our violent crime is at a 48-year low in our state. And if you check in your states, you'll probably see that that's actually true for your states as well. That there's been a dramatic decrease in reported crime. We're not talking about arrests, we're talking about reported crime. And so if that's really true, it means that police should figure out what is actually working, and they're doing a lot of things that make the ability to reduce crime very real. But so much of it is based on the relations they have with the community, and so the community policing operations, how the court works, who's in jail, and for what are critical to that. So I can tell you that today in Connecticut, keep in mind we have a combined population, jail and prisons all in one place. Our prison population is at its lowest point in 19 years. And our total prison population was 20,000 in 2008. This morning, as I sit here, it's 15,471 and dropping. Not because more people are being let out, but because fewer people are coming into prison, coming into jail. Arrests are way down, and so if this trend continues, we'll be able to meet that challenge. The 50-50 challenge, reduce the prison population by 50%. We're down 23%, and well on our way to getting there. But it's not decisions by legislature. It's very local relationships that drive this outcome.
It's another one of my tenets of success. So yes, and we seem to be on a roll here. So other themes that you've heard from the Department of Justice, from the MacArthur Foundation, and in Connecticut is really taking seriously the racial disparity that exists in the criminal justice system. We're very lucky to have with us today Tshaka Barrows from the Burns Institute, And so, Tshaka, I'm going to turn to you now. If you'll explain a little bit about the Burns Institute, because they are newer to the adult criminal justice arena, and talk about some of your efforts with MacArthur and Smart Pretrial, some challenges, and then some solutions, and if you have a good success story, we'd love to hear one.
All right, I'm glad to be here. It's good to see you all here. I just got in late last night, so I didn't get all the full energy of the conference, but this morning I can feel it in the room, so it's good. And I'm also glad to see the diversity. I know we could do better, but I think it's to acknowledge it is important. But we do need to think about our Latino and Native American brothers and sisters who are facing this issue at alarming rates and don't often come up in these forums. So I just wanted to take a little moment to acknowledge that. The Burns Institute has been around since 2002. We have worked in over 100 jurisdictions to address racial and ethnic disparities, and primarily that's with the youth justice system. We don't call it juvenile anymore. We think language is important, so we try to encourage the term youth justice. We also don't use the word minority, because in California we are not minorities, actually, and in many states you need to check your numbers. That term is no longer relevant as well. And so it's also, and it's a power dynamic really when we say it, and so we like to acknowledge these things when we do the work. We work in a particular way where we bring a collaborative together to analyze what's going on at the local level in a county. We measure each decision point by race, ethnicity, gender, geography, and offense. We call it REGO. I'll say it again in case you want to write that down and take it home and get busy. It's race, ethnicity, gender, geography, and offense. This will give you a picture, a real, much more detailed understanding of who is in your system and how did they get there, at least what was the understanding of the administrators who kind of directed them to wherever they are in your justice system. So we'll build a collaborative of the various stakeholders. Many of you have mentioned them, the courts, probation, district attorney, public defender, police. There's a few other stakeholders that we think are critical. Service providers, people who have relationships through contracts, who work, people who run organizations that do advocacy, grassroots organizing around the issue, and most importantly, people who have had direct experience with these systems. What we've learned doing this work over the last decade or so is that mostly no professionals can tell you exactly what happens within their jurisdiction, which is alarming. We call it a system, but it doesn't really function as a system. I like to much more acknowledge it to function like a shopping mall, right? Big building, lots of stores. You ever been to the mall? Come on, some of y'all been to the mall. Right, big building, bunch of stores. It's reasonable to think somebody's in charge, right? But what we know about the mall is that no one is in charge. You can go in the Foot Locker, they'll tell you, hey, we like you, we want to sell you sneakers. The next store is going out of business. One store treats you well, the next store doesn't care if the other store didn't treat you well, right? Think about the justice system in that way. That has allowed it to become wildly unaccountable for its outcomes, wherever we go. So it's not that there's a sinister group of people who are meeting to craft the demise of certain members of the community. We haven't quite found that. But what we have found is that professionals showing up to do their job every day without intentionally paying attention to this can make wild contributions to racial and ethnic disparities in ways that completely can be addressed and undone. But the way that we go about that is we build this collaborative. We bring in the community voices, but we also in our office run a national network called the Community Justice Network for Youth, CJNY. It's over roughly 200 programs around the country who are all working to undo this, what they call rail to jail. And that's what our way of acknowledging it. There's a lot of on-ramps for certain communities to get involved in the justice system, and that we have to undo those on-ramps. We have to identify each one, go after them, and meticulously figure out other strategies to put in place to prevent all these people from flowing into the justice system. Because as one law enforcement officer told me, Mr. Barrows, we do this because it's easy. It's easy for these people to end up in our system. Certain people don't, because it's not easy to get them in. They have defense attorneys, they have resources, and we know, right? And so there's a sentiment around, there's an acknowledgement there, right? And so we bring in the community, and we facilitate discussions around how, just breaking down the barriers, right? And people think this is about hip hop. People will want to talk in a meeting about how Hollywood violence is contributing to all this. And then we like to remind folks that, how much control do we have over that in this meeting room, right? And what can we do with the time and the resources that we do have to really address the things that we actually have control over? And so in that regard, we'll do a whole assessment, right? Go through and interview people, we'll interview community, people who are directly involved, have little focus groups, really try to build a better understanding of not just who's in, but what are the perceptions in that jurisdiction of what's contributing to this? And we hear all kinds of answers. We'll ask probation officers, do you think you have a role in contributing to this? No, this has nothing to do with us. But the data shows that they're wild, they're violating, African American youth, Latino youth in these ways that are really unjustifiable, but they haven't ever looked at the data, right? And so we also have to create an environment in the meeting where people are able to engage with each other in this kind of a way. It's not easily done. And so there's some challenges that come with that. There's a level of nervousness. There's a lot of fear about being called racist, right? And our whole thing about this is that that's not gonna get us out of this. To get in the room and yell at each other and start pointing the finger, it's not gonna change how decisions are necessarily being made, right? There's fear of inviting community stakeholders in because they're gonna be angry and aggressive. And I always have to ask people, you guys have a job? Who here gets off of work and goes across town to a meeting just to piss off an adult? Anyone? Anybody? Come on, at least one of you guys have done it. Right? Really, that's not realistic, right? But when we talk about these meetings and doing this work, that becomes a real barrier. They're gonna yell at us and that. It's like, no, these people have jobs, kids, responsibilities, families. They're coming here because they're invested in trying to achieve the same outcomes you are. The other challenge is our systems very rarely can tell their own story. Wherever you started from. It's not your fault, so you shouldn't feel, you know what I mean? We can talk about it. I live in a neighborhood where things happened before I was there. I have the knowledge of that. This is what we're working on now, right? And it's a similar thing in the jurisdiction, to be able to explain where you've come from and where you're trying to go. And I think the safety and justice challenge is a huge opportunity in that a lot of jurisdictions have taken a first look inside of their own backyard and were, I think, alarmed at what they saw. And so in terms of some of the challenges, the issue of data collection is an enormous challenge. And I'll just give you one real specific example. Most jurisdictions are really challenged at collecting data on Latinos. But we know Latinos are a huge population in our country, and they are involved in the justice system in significant numbers. But who do you think they count them as if they don't count them as Latino? White. What do you think that does to our ability to understand ratios and disparities and compare to how people are treated? It inflates the white category in a way that is inaccurate. It deflates a huge population of Latinos. It completely complicates our ability to understand what's going on. And it's a totally achievable problem that we can fix. It's not an unmovable mountain. There's Latino scholars who've done great research and work. We've worked with Dr. Manuel Pastor about, there's all kinds of ways that you can look at this information and break it down. But what we know is, this is work that takes willpower, it takes some bravery from those stakeholders around the table, but it also takes the voices of those communities to say, we want to be counted, we're here. You can't address what's going on to us without breaking these numbers down further. And so while we're new to the adult side, we have worked with a couple jurisdictions in the kind of way that I've described, two in California, and just for their own, for a courtesy to them, I'm not going to say exactly which counties they are because they're going through their own process with this, but we started looking at the juvenile justice system, measuring by decision point data. There was nervousness from the various stakeholders, and the district attorney's office in this county was also a bit nervous, feeling like you guys are just going to be targeting us and pointing the finger. Go through, identify the target population, because that's our strategies. Once you get that data, you identify a group that you're committed to working on. The jurisdiction, I don't remember the specific target population, but that's not really where I want to tell the story. They had success, is the ultimate point. That success really broke down barriers. People really left the notion of defensiveness and genuinely became curious about what was happening in their county. The district attorney reached out to us to contract us to bring us in to analyze the decisions they were making to directly file kids of color into the adult system. So we're not talking about low-level, stuff. The district attorney saying, I think we may have an issue here, and I want to look at what our office is doing about this so I can better understand the impacts that we're contributing to. And that's the beginning, right? And I say that as a success story, not because we've solved the issue of direct file in that county, but because when we started, that was not even on the horizon. We just were trying to get traction for the county to acknowledge they were making decisions that were contributing to these disparities in real ways. And they engaged in it at the level to which that they started pushing the process to go further. They wanted to look at those issues of direct file, right? And so that's what can be done. That's what is the next phase of the work in this country. We can impact this issue and address it. We can change these dynamics. You cannot do it alone as law enforcement administrators. You have to have the community there. You've got to engage people who've had direct experience. They can tell you things that no one else can. And you've got to be intentional. Intentionality is at the center of it, but also it's about relationships. You got to have the type of meeting where you're building a relationship together, because you're going to get into some heated discussions. And if you don't have relationship, if you don't feel any connection to each other, you're just about the agenda and you're done, you're not going to make it through some of these tough conversations as smoothly as you might if you do things like check in, have a check-in, ask people why they do this, where'd you come up, who mentored you as a young person, right? Connecting on that personal level are some of the elements we bring, as well as the high-level data analysis and kind of breaking down of the policies and the decision points. But I think where we are now in the adult system is that this is we're early on in the game. The juvenile and youth justice system has had a mandate to look at these issues for quite some time. And what we found in the adult world is that without that mandate, we're still trying to rub those sticks together and make a spark. Right? We don't have electricity. We definitely don't have smartphones. Right? We're still working to get a grip on the issues. And so the Safety and Justice Challenge, again, I think is going to be a great opportunity. But the work you all are doing is critical, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you, Tshaka. We've talked about that everyone in the criminal justice system really wants to be there and wants to work and wants to be fair and transparent. So I don't think anyone comes to their job in the criminal justice system and wants to see overrepresentation of Black and Latino men in the system. And so I loved what Tshaka said about once you create this safe space and you work with the stakeholders, that they become curious. They become curious about the data and want to fix it. And I've seen that. And I can name the county I worked with, because John Chisholm is the elected prosecutor in Milwaukee. Worked very seriously around this. And it was interesting once he saw the data and became curious, and he made very important policy and practice changes that reduced his disparity. It wasn't something that he meant to do in his office with charging and with sentencing, but once he looked at the data and saw all the disparate treatment, he was able to make a change. Also, something I want to point out that I've actually heard from Tshaka and James Bell, that so when you reduce your jail population, if one of your goals is to reduce overrepresentation of minorities, you've got to look at your data, because lots of times the jail reduction will go down, but the disparity doesn't change. And so then you're not meeting that goal. So that's something I know that Laurie and the MacArthur Foundation are pointing out, but something for you all to think about when you're doing this work and to keep on the forefront. So this session is about jail reduction and public safety. So I want to turn to the panel and ask, how is the public receiving all of the talk and the work about jail reduction? And I know public safety is one of the governor's priorities, but because a lot of people think that by keeping people in jail, we're keeping communities safer, which we know from research is not true. And so how's the public been reacting? We'll start with you, Mike.
So it's a real challenge, right? Because I think most of you, I'm sure probably all of you, are generally familiar with what the real crime trends are. But if you're at a family function or with your neighbors or at a school thing and you ask people, so what do you think compared to 20 years ago? Is crime up, is crime down, or about the same? Most people would say it's up. But it's actually not just down, but way down. And so breaking through with that realization, I would say, like, and I have to do this all the time. I just start rattling off a bunch of statistics, and like, for example, our murders in Connecticut have been fewer than 100 each year for the past 3 years. That's the first time that's happened in like 40 years. I mean, in the early 90s, we had 220, 230, 240 every year. So now around 88, 89, and so these are big changes. And I think intuitively, people understand that if you put people in jail, they're probably not going to come out a better person. Right? It's not a good place to go to learn good habits, right? It's just not like that. And one of my former colleagues in the legislature, his name is Don Williams, he had this great turn of phrase. He would say, who would you rather bump into in a dark alley? Some guy who just got out of prison after 2 years, or some guy who just got out of a drug treatment program, And everybody said, I don't want to meet the guy who just got out of prison. And so, like, I think people understand in a way that it's probably better to not do that unless it's absolutely necessary. So what we have tried to do is, and this morning would be another example of it, just get out and speak as much as possible about what the goals are, how it works, what the statistics tell us. And I have found, especially recently, when you're talking about younger people, that people have a slightly different view. We're talking about high school age, college age, because if there was, if everybody was carrying around a video camera when I was in college and able to put it online so everyone could see it, I probably would have gotten in a lot of trouble. And I think people understand how that works. And so if you can talk about people in discrete groups, it makes it a little easier to comprehend. And I just lost the final thing I was saying. Oh, I think most people, and this is, if you're trying to figure out a way to communicate these things, I think most people view the world as divided into two camps: criminals and everybody else. And we all know it's not like that, right? And I think just getting people to understand that, everybody does things from time to time which could theoretically be a crime. And how we respond to that is very important. And if our goal is we're just trying to have less of that going on, then you would do one thing. If our goal is just punishing people, you'd do something different, right? And arguably that's what's been going on in this country for the past 40 years. But like, our goal is to fix it and not have it happen in the future. So what makes that happen? So that's kind of our strategy.
So I've had the advantage of doing probably about 15 to 20 interviews recently because of the Foundation's announcement about the Safety and Justice Challenge and the awards that were just made. And I've also spent an hour on Point, an NPR station, yesterday with Tom Ashbrook, being interviewed and fielding the questions from the audience. And so I've been struck by, as we've gone through this course, of how the distinction between jail and prison is completely lost on most people. And they're always astounded when I give them the same numbers that I gave all of you in terms of the number of admissions and who makes up the jail population, and that it's disproportionately low income and affects communities of color. And they've lost sight of the reasons why jails exist. They've become warehouses now for people suffering from mental illness, or poor houses for people who don't have the money to pay their, meet their legal fines and legal financial obligations, and can't make low money bail. But we've also done some polling, and of course, that breaks down when you start to look at people from different neighborhoods and communities. And of course, not surprisingly, people of color have a very different view of the justice system than people who are white and living in different kinds of neighborhoods and communities. But then even when you start to look at the problem and break it down, So I get asked a lot about, well, isn't the real problem policing and the breakdown between police and community relations? And I said, well, think about some of those tragic incidents. Walter Scott was running away from law enforcement, probably because he had a bench warrant out for his arrest because he couldn't make child support payments. Or what happened with Sandra Brown, who had to stay in a jail over the weekend because she couldn't make bail. Or Ernest Gray, who was being transported to the jail, given a rough ride. All of these were people who didn't actually pose a risk to public safety, but our system at each point along the way is broken down in how we address social problems. So we've tried to look at this as a more comprehensive and coherent approach to systems change, but we also think it's important to have different messengers. I did get called sort of a bleeding heart plaintiff liberal by one of the callers who happened to be a state trooper from Omaha, Nebraska, he said, yeah, jails are horrible, miserable places because the people who are in them are horrible, miserable people. And so when we think about who's going to reach out to Connor from Nebraska, we know that it's not going to be the MacArthur Foundation. So even though he was listening to NPR. So we have enlisted your colleagues and professional membership organizations and groups, whom we call our strategic allies, to be along with us on this journey. So while we're documenting and tracking the jurisdictions and highlighting the leadership of people like Governor Malloy and like Mike, we're also engaging the National Center for State Courts to speak to the judges who stood up, like the chief judge in Milwaukee who's taken the lead. We mentioned the prosecutors who of often, the elected prosecutor in Harris County is providing the leadership. That's Houston, by God. In other cases, it will be the city mayor, as it is with Mayor Kenny in Philadelphia. So we're lining up groups like the National Association of Counties, the National League of Cities, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, the National Legal Aid and Defenders Association, to stand up and focus attention on these issues, because we think they're much more credible leaders in speaking out on the need to tackle the problem of the misuse and overuse of jails in America as a major component and element of a driver of mass incarceration. And that's the only way we're going to be able to change the way America thinks about these issues.
What a great note to turn to questions on. Are there any?
Can I add?
Oh, yes.
Well, there's just to add, I think if you're involved in social media, you'll see that there's a huge clamoring, not just to say that this is a broken system, but to say we have to call for an end to mass incarceration. And it's not just young people. Clearly the Black Lives Matter movement has called it out, but we're seeing intellectuals, Hollywood stars, athletes. So I think a large cross-section of individuals have really said this is way out of line and we have to do something about this, which I think is really powerful. I mean, and also, prisoners themselves went on hunger strikes to address the issue of solitary confinement, which has now led to several initiatives nationally to address solitary confinement. So we also need to listen to those folks who are in the trenches of this, because I think they've been saying very clearly for a long time and exploring to us that we have to do something about this. This is not working. And so those voices, I think, are now getting heard in ways that haven't been heard in the past, and I think it's also changing the public conversation as well.
Yes, thank you.